Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to you for allowing me to make this statement. Let me wholeheartedly apologise that I wasn't able to set out these measures to the House first. I can provide the reassurance that you requested, and I hope honourable and right honourable members across the House understand that these are extraordinary circumstances. Mr. Speaker, I want to take the opportunity today to set out for the House the next stage of our economic plan in response to the coronavirus. The coronavirus pandemic is a public health emergency, but it is also an economic emergency. We have never in peacetime faced a fight of an economic nature like this. I know that people are deeply worried. I know that people's anxiety about the disease itself is matched only by anxiety about their livelihoods. In the budget last week, I set out the first stage of our economic response with a £30 billion package to support people and businesses. I promise to do whatever it takes to support our economy through this crisis, and that if the situation changed, I would not hesitate to take further action. As the Prime Minister set out yesterday, we're now approaching the fast growth part of the upwards curve. He has set out the next stage of our public health response, and I want to update the House on the next stage of our economic response. Let me begin by setting out for the House our overarching economic strategy. People should know that the objective of our economic policy remains clear, and our resolve remains firm. We will do whatever it takes to protect households and businesses to get through this and to make sure that the effects do not become permanent. As we develop our strategy, not just today, but over the coming days and weeks, we will be guided by three principles. First, our response must be comprehensive. This national effort will be underpinned by government interventions in the economy on a scale unimaginable only a few weeks ago. This is not a time for ideology or orthodoxy. This is a time to be bold, a time for courage. I want to reassure every British citizen this government will give you the tools you need to get through this. We will support jobs, we will support incomes, we will support businesses, we will help protect your loved ones. We will do whatever it takes. Second, our response must be coordinated. We in government are working hand in glove with the wider economic authorities. Domestically, that includes the Bank of England, the regulators, and the health response. And internationally, I continue to engage with my G7 and G20 counterparts to agree and facilitate a global response. Third, our response must be coherent. It would be easy at a time like this to rush into a response and measures that we found out later had been ill-considered. The single most important test in this House we must set ourselves is to make sure that the actions we take will, in the lives of ordinary people and businesses, make a difference. To apply these principles in practice, we will use fiscal action to support public services, households and businesses. The budget last week set out the first stage, including our commitment to provide the NHS with whatever it needs. In the coming days, I will take further steps with a particular focus on supporting people and individuals. But in response to the updated medical advice yesterday, I can take three immediate steps today. First, the government will stand behind businesses, small and large. I can announce today an unprecedented package of government-backed and guaranteed loans to support businesses to get through this. Today, I am making available an initial £330 billion of guarantees, equivalent to 15% of our GDP. That means any business who needs to access cash to pay their rent, their salaries or supplies will be able to access a government-backed loan on attractive terms. And if demand is greater than the initial £330 billion I'm making available today, I will go further and provide as much capacity as required. Yeah. I said whatever it takes, and I mean it. Yeah. That support will be delivered through two main schemes. To support liquidity amongst larger firms, I have today agreed a new lending facility with the Governor of the Bank of England to provide low-cost commercial paper. To support lending to small and medium-sized businesses, I'm extending the new business interruption loan scheme I announced at the budget last week, so that rather than loans of up to £1.2 million, it will now provide loans of up to £5 million with no interest due for the first 6 months. Both of these schemes will be up and running by the start of next week. And I am also taking a new legal power in the COVID bill to offer whatever financial further support I decide is necessary. Some sectors are facing particularly acute challenges. In the coming days, my colleague, the Right Honourable Friend, the Secretary of State for Transport, and I will discuss a specific potential support package for airlines and airports. And yesterday, I asked my Cabinet colleagues to urgently convene meetings over the coming days with business leaders and representatives in the most affected sectors to identify other specific opportunities to support them, including possible regulatory forbearance. I repeat, we will do whatever it takes. Second, as well as access to finance, businesses need support with their cash flow and fixed costs. Following the changed medical advice yesterday, there are genuine concerns about the impact on pubs, clubs, theatres and other hospitality, leisure and retail venues. Let me confirm today that for those businesses which do have a policy that covers pandemics, the government's action is sufficient and will allow businesses to make an insurance claim against their policy. But many of those businesses don't have insurance, so we need to go further. I announced last week that for businesses in the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors with a rateable value of less than £51,000, they will pay no business rates this year. Today, I can go further and provide those businesses with an additional cash grant of up to £25,000 per business to help bridge through this period. Yeah. Additionally, I'm extending this business rates holiday to all businesses in these sectors, irrespective of their rateable value. That means every single shop, pub, theatre, music venue, restaurant and any other business in the retail, hospitality or leisure sector will pay no business rates whatsoever for 12 months. And if they have a rateable value of less than £51,000, they will now get a cash grant as well. I also announced last week that we would be providing £3,000 grants to the 700,000 of our smallest businesses. To support their cash flow in these exceptional circumstances, today I can increase those cash grants to £10,000. Yeah. Taken together on top of the unlimited lending capacity I have already announced, that is a package of tax cuts and grants in this financial year to directly support businesses worth more than £20 billion. That comes on top of the existing multi-billion-pound package I set out at budget, which included reimbursing small and medium-sized companies for the cost of statutory sick pay. Local authorities in England will be fully compensated for the costs of these measures, and the devolved administrations will receive at least £3.5 billion in additional funding as a result to provide support to businesses in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. I repeat again, we will do whatever it takes. Third, I will strengthen our support for peoples and individuals. At budget last week, I committed £1 billion to support the financial security of vulnerable people through a £500 million boost to the welfare system and a £500 million hardship fund for local authorities. following discussions with industry, I can announce today that for those in difficulty due to coronavirus, mortgage lenders will now offer a 3-month mortgage holiday so that people will not have to pay a penny towards their mortgage while they get back on their feet. And in the coming days, Mr. Speaker, I will go much further to support people's financial security. In particular, I will work with trade unions and businesses to urgently develop new forms of employment support to help protect people's jobs and incomes through this period. Mr. Speaker, let no one doubt our resolve. When I said in the budget last week that we will do everything we can to keep this country and our people healthy and financially secure, I meant it. The measures I have announced today are part of a comprehensive, coordinated and coherent response to what is a serious and evolving economic situation. These are only the first steps, and I will set out the next stage of our response in the coming days. We have never faced an economic fight like this one, but we are well prepared. We will get through this, and we will do whatever it takes. And I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, John McDonnell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There was an element of déjà vu about that statement. I want to thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for providing us an earlier copy. And can I just say to him, of course, we recognise the immense threat from this virus faces our country, in fact, the globe, and we want to work with him to ensure that we do everything we can to protect our economy and our people. But I have to say this to him. Today, in some of our constituencies, people were being laid off. They were losing their jobs and losing their incomes, and their livelihoods are being threatened. And people are worried, and I'm just disappointed that today's package of measures didn't really appreciate the urgency and the gravity of the situation for those individuals and those families. To protect, let's establish a principle, to establish it throughout our discussions now. To protect our people, the underlying principle must be that wherever a person is sick or self-isolating or laid off from their employment, we must protect their income, and we will give them security. So can I just range through a number of questions about issues that he failed to address today, and I hope will be addressed urgently now. For those people that are sick, there's an urgent need for statutory sick pay to be available for everybody from day one. And that means extending it to people who are on low pay, who are on part-time work, zero-hour contracts, who at the moment do not qualify. And can I ask the Chancellor, can he now consider abolishing completely the lower earnings limit with regard to statutory sick pay as called for by the CBI? And can I also say to him, can he heed the call of the TUC and other groups to lift the overall level of statutory sick pay? The TUC has proposed that this should be raised to the level of the real living wage, and I think we should support that. Other countries are providing 100% protection of wages. There's a number of other questions that remain unanswered with regard to individuals. With those workers who have been asked to self-isolate, teachers, health workers, nurses, carers, other essential public servants, will they be required to isolate, but will they be protected on full pay to ensure the essential services continue? Will the government assure people of a right to work from home? And there are other pressures felt by individuals. They relate to rents and mortgages and evictions. I really regret, and I ask the Chancellor to consider this urgently this evening, there is nothing in the statement to protect renters. Will the Chancellor, and it affects us all our constituents, will the Chancellor bring forward urgently now measures to protect renters, prevent evictions and enable rent holidays for those people unable to meet their costs? Will the Chancellor put powers in the legislation now to follow the example of some other countries as well, to freeze or suspend utility bill payments on a statutory footing because this is an emergency? And for those who have already lost their jobs, let's be clear, the level and access to universal credit is unacceptable. The Chancellor has said those receiving universal credit can receive an advance as a loan. This is pushing people into debt, some of them the poorest in our society. The CPAG has said, can we make that loan non-repayable as a grant? Can I urge him to consider that? The Chancellor has said, and I welcome it, that he's going to bring the trade unions together to look at a more sustainable package. We need to do that within days, not weeks. And we work with him to ensure that happens. And I just cite other examples. Just take the Danish example, where the government covers 75% of wages and companies cover 25%. And wages give up some holidays in exchange, that's true, but there is a job guarantee for those workers. So we want support, financial, but we want guarantees that these people, when this crisis is over, will have a job to go back to, particularly in those companies where there's been significant layoffs. And unfortunately, we are now facing significant job losses and a real sense of uncertainty for workers and businesses alike. And I have to say that uncertainty was made worse last night by statements with regard to the hospitality sector. The clarity that's needed, I don't believe the Chancellor's statement today gives that clarity. Will he make it clear to those insurance companies that this hospitality sector, the pubs, the clubs, the theatres, the festivals that are taking place, they are closing on the instruction of the government? And in that way, most of them, even if they haven't got pandemic within their insurance policies, will be covered. I welcome today's announcement of loan guarantees. I welcome it to businesses. But I noticed in the small print, and if he can clarify this, that it is interest-free for a period of 6 months only. And I'm not sure if that gives sufficient support and guarantee for the long term that many will want. I welcome the grants, but can I say to him that the response so far from a number of businesses has been the grants, the scale of the grants needs reviewing. They're too small and don't relate to the costs that people are involved in at the moment. I welcome what the government said about the business rates relief holiday. But last week, the statement seemed to exclude nurseries and childcare, and I wonder if he can just clarify that that has been remedied now, because childcare and nurseries will be desperately needed in this coming period. Can I also say that there is a bit of concern that's been expressed that the British Business Bank, being asked last week to deliver the Business Interruption Loan Scheme, as of very recently, there's little public evidence that the scheme has been established or developed. Just turning to individual sectors quickly, Mr. Speaker, on the aviation sector and other key transport sectors, I accept there is a need now for support. But I say just gently, I resent Mr. Branson urging his workers to go for 8 weeks of unpaid leave when he makes such a fortune, often by tax avoidance as well. And can I suggest that if we are going to give grants and loans and assistance to some of these sectors, we should look at whether or not we take an equity stake for the long term. And that relates to the rail sector as well. Can the Chancellor indicate whether there is any planning that if any franchises fail, they will be brought into public ownership and management? One of the sectors that has been raised with us as well, which is deeply worrying now, is the fishing sector. It's been hit hard, particularly because of its inability to export. And we've been told of the lack of insurance cover for boat mortgages. Can we look at that rapidly now to develop some form of legislative protection? And agriculture is now moving into the planting season and was already facing significant shortage of workers, and it now faces even bigger challenges. Can we ask the Chancellor to reassure us that there will be support for agriculture throughout, because food supplies will be so essential during this coming period, domestic food supplies in particular? Just very briefly, Mr. Speaker, because I have to raise it because the Chancellor never mentioned it in any depth, on public services. Can I ask the Chancellor with regard to the NHS funding? And we well received the commitment that whatever the NHS needs, it will get. But can we just be absolutely clear now on the scale of the allocation of funding to enable testing to take place at scale? The £5 billion figure that was set, the response fund, didn't earmark any particular funding for the NHS, let alone for testing. And clearly the public want now the reassurance that testing is to be developed, and we need the funding. Can also, on the NHS, can the government point to stronger steps that need to be taken to manufacture the essential ventilators and provide the PPE for frontline NHS workers? The reality is that also, I have to say to the Chancellor as well, if we're harvesting our resources, we do not believe we should be paying for private hospital beds at this time. In fact, many of us believe they should be requisitioned for the use of the whole community. On the overall system of caring for our population, it relies not just on the NHS, but on social care. Can we ask the Chancellor to be absolutely clear now on the scale of funding that has been directed so far for social care? There's uncertainty at the moment. And what he thinks is the best estimate of the level of funding that will be needed, given the fact that already we've inherited 120,000 vacancies and staff numbers may well dwindle because of the impact of the virus. And I have to say as well, we've seen evidence in recent years of some care companies facing threats to their financial viability. What plans has the government developed to intervene, if necessary, in this sector? Can I also say there's pressure on family carers who are relied upon to support our social care system, and we need proposals to support them financially too. Can I say briefly, coming to a conclusion, Mr. Secretary, can I say that one area of change that has been mooted is in relation to the possible closure of our schools. It's crucial that childcare support is provided in the event of any closures occurring. And I have to say also, and I say to the Chancellor, we'll work with him on this and we'll work with local authorities, but it is crucial that those children that are dependent on free school dinners receive support if the schools are closed. We cannot allow them to go hungry. Staff of schools may be off for long periods and we need to ensure their incomes are guaranteed, and we'd like that assurance too. Can I say as well that pupils or students are being advised to study from home, and most will require access to high-speed broadband. Can we ask him what will be done to ensure access to broadband for students? And can I suggest to him that it could be free? We all rely in our communities along the voluntary sector as well, and it is being hit hard because of the temporary downturn in donations and also staffing levels. So can I ask him what consideration has been given for grants to ensure that the voluntary sector can continue to play its important functions? Can I say finally, in terms of the Barnett consequentials, we need more clarity. Very quickly, there is uncertainty about the scale of support that will be given to the devolved countries and regions. Can I finally say, with regard to the international interventions, in 2007-2008, whatever people thought about Gordon Brown's individual policies, actually he showed international leadership to tackle that crisis. I've expressed previously my disappointment that the government didn't act sooner in bringing countries together. Can I urge him now to follow up the teleconference with the G7 on Monday with the engagement through the G20, the World Bank, the WHO and UN, and bring forward now a global plan with his colleagues to ensure that we can give not just assurance to the markets, but to assurance for those, particularly in the global south, who may well be hit hardest by this virus. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of the Exchequer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the right honourable member for the constructive attitude in which he approaches some of these issues, and very much welcome his desire to work with me to try and solve some of these pressing issues that face our nation. Can I try and answer as many of the specific questions that he asked? Starting with financial security for our most vulnerable people. I wholeheartedly agree that this is a priority and should be a priority, which is why in the budget we made significant changes to the operation of statutory sick pay, universal credit, and employment and support allowance to ensure that people had quicker and more generous access to a support system for them and their families. We already invested £1 billion to provide that extra security, but of course we keep all of these things under review, and as I said, the next step of our plan is to focus on providing support to people, their incomes and their jobs over the coming days. Secondly, he asked about insurance for the leisure sector. I can confirm that after extensive meetings today between my honourable friend, the Minister and the insurance industry, I can confirm that the insurance industry will honour insurance contracts that would have been triggered by the advice being to ban certain things rather than it being advisory to not do them. That has been agreed and negotiated by my right honourable friend. I thank him for those efforts. And I thank the insurance industry for doing the right thing. Thirdly, he asked rightly about renters. And of course, I announced measures today on mortgages. He's absolutely right. The biggest fixed cost that many families face will be their rent payment, and it is right that we have regard to that. What I can tell him is my right honourable friend, the Housing Secretary, will in the coming days be making a statement with further measures to protect renters through these difficult times. He fourthly asked about other countries and their experience and global leadership. What I would say to him, he mentioned some specific examples of schemes. I can assure him that I am in touch with my counterparts across the G7 and the G20, understanding how schemes in other countries work. For example, he mentioned employment support schemes that are in both Germany and Denmark. What I would say to him and to members of the House is, whatever potential package or scheme that we can come up with that we do believe will provide the appropriate support, it's important that we can actually operationalise that at speed. The difference between our system and that of many other countries is that they have these systems already in place where it's far easier for them to step them up quickly. What we need to do is make sure we come up with a solution that can be delivered so that it makes a difference to people quickly. Which is why I'm happy to work closely with unions and business groups to see what will make the most sense. With regard to international leadership, I would say to him that what was widely noticed amongst other countries was that last week, this country, you saw both monetary and fiscal policy, the government and the Bank of England, working independently but in a coordinated fashion to provide significant support and confidence to the economy. That was something that was acknowledged by people, including the IMF, who noticed what happened here and pointed at it as an example for others to follow. In terms of the scale of our response, again, I would point out to him and ask him to have a look at the analysis that's been done comparing various different countries on the scale of the fiscal support that they are providing. And again, I think he will find that the package of measures that have been announced both last week and today show that we have one of the strongest responses out of anybody in the G7 as a percentage of GDP to this significant challenge that we face. When it comes, he asked about the delivery of the loan scheme, and he's right, and it is right to focus on how these will be delivered. We have been working at pace over the past week to make sure that these loans can be delivered not by the British Business Bank but by individual retail banks on the high streets up and down this country. And again, because of the work of my right honourable friend, this will happen by early next week, that businesses will be able to walk into their local branches and request a business interruption loan that has been backed by the government on these attractive terms. And again, it is right that we have to work with the systems that we have, so that we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, because we want to be able to deliver these schemes as quickly as possible to businesses up and down the country. He asked about support for a variety of sectors. What I can tell him is I have urgently asked my Cabinet colleagues to convene roundtables and engagement with their particular industries to understand if there are specific measures that we should be looking at on top of the measures for airlines and airports that we can look to address in the coming days, and that will answer all of the sectors that he mentioned would be covered by that. And I agree with him. When it comes to providing support to larger companies, if the taxpayer is going to be put at risk in supporting these companies, it is right that the taxpayer is rewarded on the other side. That is a principle that we also wholeheartedly agree with, and he can rest assured that as we negotiate those situations, that we will always be protecting the interests of taxpayers. And lastly, he asked rightly about public services. Our number one priority is to ensure that the NHS has everything it needs to get through this period. I made that commitment last week. I re-echo that commitment today. On terms of the Barnett consequentials, he would have seen this week that we released in advance the full amount of the Barnett consequentials resulting from the budget package in advance to all devolved authorities. And today, I announced the overall quantum, and again, we will quickly release in advance of those payments being released in England to the devolved authorities so that they can plan appropriately. He can rest assured that on all the very specific public service issues that he mentioned, whether school meals, schools and social care, these are under active and urgent consideration. But if I could end on this, our public servants, and in particular those working hardest in our NHS right now, deserve nothing but our support at this difficult time. I want them to know, and I want the country to know, that we will do whatever it takes to get through this.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. These are truly shocking times, Mr. Speaker, and a great weight lies upon the shoulders of my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, and I hope it is felt right across the House that we wish him every success in his endeavours to steer us through this crisis. He has come forward with a huge response to the current situation, which I know will, in many quarters and businesses up and down the country, provide some reassurance. There are, however, inevitably some areas in which there is still work to come, not least in terms of the employment support package, and I noted the fact that he will be engaging closely with trade unions and businesses shortly to flesh that out. Could I urge him to do so as quickly and promptly as possible? And could I ask him whether he knows at this stage when the conclusions of that exercise may be reached, so that we can provide that vital reassurance to employers and employees who fear for their jobs at the moment right up and down our country? This is a time in our history, Mr. Speaker, when not just days but hours matter.
I thank my honourable friend for his thoughtful support, and I can tell him that we are working on those proposals urgently and plan to hopefully have answers for both him and the House in the coming days, ideally next week, with an early thought of what we can do. As I said, designing these schemes will take an appropriate amount of diligence and care, and that is what we are focused on urgently as we speak. And he is right, this is about hours, not days and weeks.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Chancellor for the action that he's announced and for the extra money that he is bringing this evening. I also want to put on record my thanks to health staff, to volunteers and to everybody who is working at the forefront of this crisis. I also want to mark my sadness at the second death that has been recorded in Scotland today. Mr. Speaker, we want to work across the economy and across society, because this is about, fundamentally, this is about people's lives here, and the Chancellor is right to say that there should be nothing spared when we come to this. Can the Chancellor tell me, first of all, what the Barnett consequentials precisely will be from today's announcements? Because he says that the Scottish Government knew in advance, and I do not want to make this party political, and I don't make this point to be party political, but my understanding is the Scottish Government only got notified by letter at 5:30 p.m. yesterday of the previous set of Barnett consequentials from last week's budget. And I hear members saying that that has been the same for Wales. The Scottish Government wants to act, and they want to act swiftly, and they must not be behind the curve of what England is doing. And the Chancellor must pick up the phone to Kate Forbes, the Scottish Cabinet Finance Secretary, to let her know exactly what is coming, so that she can make the action for Scotland's businesses and individuals right across the country. The Chancellor mentioned that loans will be in attractive terms. Can he tell us more about the details of those loans? Because businesses will be nervous about taking on more debt at this time. And interest fee over 6 months is perhaps not good enough for businesses who are struggling at the moment and questioning their very future. Flexibility for the Chancellor on next steps is welcome again, but we would expect to see those come before the House if that is at all possible. On airlines, will the Chancellor take a stake in these airlines in order to guarantee that money for the future? And will he make sure that in any intervention to airlines that staff are protected first? And that would include support staff within airports and the supply chain as well, not just airline staff directly, because all of them are worried about their jobs. Cash grants for small businesses are very welcome, but I would suggest gently that the £3,000 that was announced last week really wasn't enough, and announcing £10,000 today really goes to show how short that was. The hospitality sector in particular needs urgent clarity about what is going to happen for events, for pubs, right across the sector. And the government needs to be absolutely clear that if people are to stay away from pubs, pubs need to know that, and they need to have the backing of the government if those pubs are to close. And all right across the hospitality sector, including hotels and including lots of small businesses in that supply chain as well. The ABI have suggested, Mr Speaker, that many businesses will not have a policy that covers pandemic. So will the UK Government stand as an insurer of last resort, as Professor Sir Charles Bean suggested at the Treasury Select Committee today, when he said big early action is better than half-hearted action that's late? And I would urge the Chancellor to think on that. I would also ask him that if insurers are being asked to pay out on all of these policies, can the insurers themselves cope? And will the Government stand behind the insurers if that needs to be the case? I want to ask the Chancellor what protection is being given to pregnant women around maternity entitlement, because lots of women have been asked to take their maternity leave early, which will then affect how long they can stay off at the end of that, and they need to know that the Government will back them on that as well, and they will not lose out on that maternity leave due to the coronavirus. The Chancellor has made no mention of private renters within his remarks, and particularly those young people who are more likely as well to be in insecure employment. If the Chancellor is going to give a break to those paying mortgages, lots of those will be buy-to-rent mortgages, where people will be renting accommodation, and if the mortgage holders are getting a break, that must be guaranteed for the renters as well. That must be passed on, and passed on quickly. And there are people who are losing their tenancies around the country just now, if you look at Twitter, and they don't know about whether they can get into a new tenancy. In the US, there has been $1,000 to go to Americans. In Italy, €500 to the self-employed. Will he consider such direct schemes to individuals who may be struggling to cope? Will he also look at the situation for asylum seekers and those with no recourse to public funds who cannot claim benefits? Because those people are particularly vulnerable just now. The services and the food banks and the voluntary action that they rely on will disappear, and those people need to have direct payments as well if they are to live through this crisis. I note that France is going to direct payment of bills. Will the Chancellor look at that as a measure, because that will just stop money being taken out of people's pockets rather than putting money into people's pockets as a different mechanism? Is that something that he's spoken to the energy companies about? To turn to the issue of the vulnerability of people in the economy just now, the Fraser of Allender Institute has said that young people under 25, only 1 in 4 under 25s have enough savings to cover 1 month of income. Under 25s are incredibly vulnerable, and will you look at specific measures to tackle the issues for young people? Households at the bottom end of the income decile, only 42% at the bottom income decile have enough savings to cover a month. People are not going to manage through this crisis on the basis of the money they have in the bank at the moment, because a lot of people have no money in the bank. The Chancellor needs to consider how he's going to deal with this and make sure that those people can put food in the table, and particularly for families. Because if the schools do close and people can't work, there is no money coming into those households, and that Chancellor needs to think how those families will put food on the table for those children during this extended period. A lot has been made about statutory sick pay, and I would agree with everybody who has said statutory sick pay is woefully inadequate to deal with the crisis that we face. And the Government has suggested that universal credit is what people should apply for, but they seem to forget that universal credit is far less generous even than statutory sick pay for many people. So will he increase urgently the amount of money that people can get through the universal credit system? Will he upgrade that at the moment and uprate that so that people can get enough money to survive through this crisis? Will he look at extending the period for universal credit advances, or ideally get rid of those advances and pay directly straight away? And will he make sure that the DWP look carefully at the implications of people claiming universal credit for their entitlement to legacy benefits? Because people may lose out on their legacy benefits if they jump into universal credit just now. And will they protect that for all claimants so that they don't lose out in the long term? Mr Speaker, this is a crisis. I welcome all action that the UK Government is going to take on this. But the questions this afternoon will be many. There will be legion, and people will have so many questions in the days ahead. So I ask the Government to listen and to react as quickly as they can to all the questions that honourable colleagues will raise this evening and in the weeks and months ahead.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for her comments, and I can reassure her I am listening, and indeed I welcome all the suggestions that she's made, and indeed all honourable members will make. We are listening attentively, both honourable members and to businesses and others, to make sure that we can provide the support that is required. To answer the specific questions, the Barnett consequentials resulting from today's package will be about £3.5 billion. My honourable friend, the Chief Secretary, will be speaking to the Scottish Finance Minister, I believe tomorrow, to explain in more detail how this will work. And I would say that what we did earlier this week is to release the Barnett consequentials to devolved authorities before that money has been drawn down in England, as would be typical, to provide advance on the Barnett consequentials to all devolved authorities in recognition of the circumstances that everyone is grappling with, so that they can plan appropriately, and I hope that that would be welcomed. Obviously, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on the specifics of any intervention in any particular company, whether it's airlines or anything else, but I agree with her that in general we are interested in protecting people's jobs. And when I stand here and talk about supporting businesses, I'm keen to support businesses because that's the best way to protect jobs, and that ultimately is the best way to help people. She asked about the cash grants, Mr Speaker. What I would say in terms of thinking about the scale of these grants and how significant they might be, for let's take the £10,000 grant available for anyone currently in receipt of small business rate relief, the typical rateable value on one of those properties would be about £7,000 approximately. That's a good proxy for a year's worth of rent. A £10,000 cash grant is therefore reasonably significant in covering what is probably the biggest fixed cost of a business, and then looked on an income level as well as what an average income might be of one of those smaller businesses. Again, it will be significant. And she talked, of course, about pubs and the leisure sector. In that sector, not only will there be a business rates holiday for the next 12 months for all businesses in that sector, regardless of their rateable value, there will be also a £25,000 cash grant for businesses up to £51,000. She asked about insurance. What I would say to her, I think the statement today is welcome on insurance. In terms of retrospectively changing insurance policies, that is rightly something that she identified would cause solvency issues, most likely with insurance companies, so is not perhaps the most appropriate course of action, which is why we have several other measures of support directly to business in these circumstances. And she will probably be aware that very few businesses actually have the requisite insurance in any case, so although the steps today are welcome, it is important we think more broadly about direct support. I welcome her question on maternity pay, which I will go away and talk to my honourable friend, the Work and Pension Secretary, about and reflect on that. With regard to renters, again, my earlier answer stands. My honourable friend, the Housing Secretary, will shortly be making an announcement about further measures to protect renters. And in closing, she talked about other countries and fiscal responses and individual measures. Every country is doing this slightly differently, but broadly are trying to do the same things through different means. I think the best way to judge us is to judge this total scale of our fiscal response, and on that metric, as a percentage of GDP benchmarked to almost all developed countries, we have what is to date one of the most comprehensive and significant packages of scale, which underlies our commitment, as I said, to do what it takes to get the country through this.
David Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I strongly welcome the Chancellor's enormous loan and guarantee package, but he himself recognised that this is supporting the liquidity of businesses rather than their long-term viability. We want to see the employment protected. So can I ask him that he doesn't just fund business in ways that enable the maintenance of employment, but actively incentivises the maintenance of employment? It's not the same thing. Block grants won't do it. And when he does that, he does it by more than just going the route of sectoral support packages. If he takes sectoral support packages, tens of thousands of small businesses will fall through the cracks, which means, unfortunately, an incredibly tailored system. And you'll have to design really rather intricate mechanisms for ensuring that we pay people properly. That may involve small claims courts, it may involve the insurance business, it may involve British Chambers of Commerce and the like. Can I ask him, however, to look at that? Because it's important. He's done what he's done today in terms of maintaining liquidity, but his main aim must be to maintain the viability of the British economy.
I think my right honourable friend makes a good point. I do believe providing liquidity now ensures sustainability for the future, which is why it is important. But he's right to identify the further steps needed in providing support on fixed costs, for example, employment, and preserving and incentivising that employment, and that is urgently the work that we are undertaking.
Rachel Reeves.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. If you are off work at the moment on statutory sick pay or self-isolating for public health reasons, if you are laid off because there is no work, if you are self-employed or if you are low paid, there is nothing at all today in the package of measures from the Chancellor. The Chancellor says that these things are under review. Well, as a matter of urgency, could he at least increase statutory sick pay to the level of the national living wage and come back to this House with a whole package of support that ensures that workers are not going to be financially penalised for doing the right thing and not being able to pay their bills, their rents and put food on the table?
Well, I could say that to the right honourable member, we have spent £1 billion into the welfare system to provide extra financial security for those people, to speed up both access and the generosity of all of those benefits.
Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Chancellor and his team for all that's been announced today. And I know that those in the retail hospitality sector in West Worcestershire will be very pleased to hear what he has announced today. There is a sector of the retail market that is doing incredibly well, and that is the supermarkets. And in fact, many of my constituents are worried because they rely on those home deliveries from supermarkets. Can the Chancellor update the House on what he is doing with his colleagues to talk to the supermarket industry about increasing capacity for home delivery?
My honourable friend makes an excellent point. I can tell her that the Agriculture Secretary is in urgent talks with supermarkets to ensure the security of our food supply and to improve accessibility, particularly for those who may now be at home.
Yes, Phillips.
Mr. Speaker, I simply want to ask the Chancellor if he could live on £94.25 per week. A simple question. Has he ever lived on that? And could he live on that? Because that's what most of my constituents are currently having to live on.
Mr. Speaker, we believe in a strong safety net for people through a short period of time to get through this, which is why we have strengthened that safety net with £1 billion of extra investment to increase the generosity and accessibility.
Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I commend my right honourable friend the Chancellor for his bold measures today, which will encourage many small businesses to believe that the government is on their side. There's more to do, I know. Can I also encourage him, though, in his statement to come on further employment measures, to bear in mind the most important thing we can do is to do everything we can to keep people in employment. It will help with their growth. But one area I want to raise with him, which has not really been touched on, I do think the Shadow Chancellor raised it, it's the voluntary sector. The Centre for Social Justice has done some quick work on this and come to the conclusion that the smallest elements of the voluntary sector, who have no reserves, are going to lose about £400 million during the course of this next few months, and they're going to be the ones that are called upon most for support in the community to those who suffer. Could I please ask him to look at this very carefully and see what we can do to give them that cash aid?
Chancellor.
Well, my right honourable friend knows better than most the value of making sure that people have the security of a good job, and I commend him for all his work in that regard and agree with him wholeheartedly. My right honourable friend, the Community Secretary, is talking already to the voluntary sector, and we stand ready to provide the support that may be required.
Ed Miliband.
can I say to the Chancellor that I recognise, and I'm sure the whole House does, his wish to get any employment support scheme right. But he will recognise, as the Shadow Chancellor said from the front bench, that people are facing redundancy right now. Can I suggest two things he can say tonight to help ward off those redundancies? First, that he accepts the principle that government should cover a substantial proportion of people's wages because it's in the interests of them, the economy and their businesses. And secondly, that he undertakes to come back not next week, but by Friday of this week with a clear plan developed with unions and businesses.
What I'd say to the honourable member is it's more important that we get this right than rush to things that won't work. But he can rest assured that we agree wholeheartedly with the ambitions of what he says, but delivering them and getting it right is vital, and that's what we're working on doing.
George Freeman.
Congratulate and thank the Chancellor on behalf of the people of Mid-Norfolk for a coherent and comprehensive package, in particular the support for rates and mortgages. In my rural and quite fragile economy, it is the pubs, the high streets, the small businesses, tourism and farming and food processing that are the backbone of the economy. Could I press him on the insurance point? Many of my local employers, their policies simply don't cover liability for epidemics. Wouldn't it be sensible to look at reinforcing the insurance industry, who've got the wherewithal to deliver the support, so that they, who've made money in the good years, can help companies that really need it in tough times?
I appreciate the point my honourable friend's making. I think the steps today are welcome on insurance, but he's right to identify that retrospectively changing the situation that insurers would have reserved against could have very significant impact on their solvency, which would send ripple effect throughout the entire insurance market, which is not something that I think any of us would want to see.
Angela Reidel.
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor must surely recognise that those on statutory sick pay are being asked to protect the rest of us, but take only £96 a week in income and live on that, and that those on universal credit, if they can access the system at all, will be asked to live on £74 a week, and millions of people are simply not eligible for either of those deeply flawed structures. He has to do something fast. He has to do it quickly. Instead of talking about the £1 billion he's already put in, will he now realise that he's got to move fast to reassure people that if they do the right thing, they will not suffer and they'll be able to put food on the table and maintain their housing and their children's meals?
Mr. Speaker, we have provided £500 million specifically to local authorities to provide extra support, particularly to help people with housing costs, notably council tax, and that will make an enormous difference to people on the ground.
Mark Eastwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many mortgage payers within my constituency will welcome the 3-month holiday announced today. However, could the Chancellor confirm whether this will be implemented automatically by the banks and mortgage lenders, or will borrowers need to apply?
Borrowers can speak to their mortgage provider, and due to the work of my honourable friend today, they should receive a 3-month mortgage holiday, depending on their circumstances explained, but it should be reasonably automatic thereafter.
I'm expecting to run this to around 9 o'clock. Sir Edward Davey.
Speaker, our economy is suffering a heart attack, and a heart attack deeper and bigger than that it had in 2008. So the Chancellor has a serious responsibility, and he deserves constructive engagement from everyone in this House, including our party. His main task, Mr. Speaker, is to ensure that there is confidence in the business community and confidence from the British people. And I have to tell him that though he has made a good start, this is still very much work in progress. His package for the business sector was large, but, Mr. Speaker, can I urge him to say far more about the loan terms that he's putting forward? There will be many small businesses very worried about taking on this debt. And when it comes to ordinary people, can I urge him to go much faster to give confidence to the people who are suffering in our constituencies?
I thank the right honourable friend for his constructive attitude. I look forward to working with him. What I would say on the loan terms is they will be interest-free for 6 months. Because of the liquidity that's been provided by the Bank of England, they will be incredibly cheap, and they will be available on a rolling basis for commercial paper, so they will be loans that are accessible and very valuable to businesses, and they'll be ready from next week.
Sir John Redwood.
I said that the Chancellor recognises there needs to be burden sharing on employment costs in badly affected sectors like tourism and travel and hospitality. But will he also make sure that there's a package for the self-employed, because some of those are losing a very large amount of their business as well?
I think my right honourable friend has written about the importance of the employment support. I look forward to getting his thoughts on those particular measures.
Karen Buck.
Half of my constituents rent privately, the highest proportion in the country. A quarter of all Londoners rent privately. 13 million people across the country rent privately. A third of them have no savings whatsoever. When we have the statement from the Housing Minister, can he assure me that in addition to any legislative change to protect renters, there is also going to be money on the table to help people on low incomes and insecure employment pay their rent, so that this crisis does not mean that they also get into debt and risk losing their homes?
We very much recognise the fact that rent is a significant portion of most household bills, which is why the Housing Secretary will shortly be outlining measures in this regard.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Measures announced by the Chancellor should be welcome, but many of my constituents who are self-employed are worried because their cash flow has stopped now. When can we expect further announcements on how we're going to help these people, and will he consider extending the loans that he's made available to businesses for this category of people?
I can confirm to my honourable friend that the loans available already will be available to those who are self-employed, and many of them, those who do have small properties, will benefit from the business rate reliefs and grants as well.
Samuel Wilson.
My party also wish to work with the government in ensuring that we get through this crisis as easily as we possibly can. But could I just say to him, already redundancies are starting across a range of industries in Northern Ireland, and it is important that if he is coming with the next step, that it addresses the issue of how you keep people in employment and how firms are supported. And while I understand he wants to get it right, he also has to get it done.
Well, I can tell the right honourable member we will get it done, we will do it at pace, and we very much agree it is important to protect people's jobs. That's the security that we want to provide.
Ray Manchester.
I very much welcome the statement by the Chancellor and all the government's doing to support individuals and businesses in my constituency. A specific point for the Chancellor that's been raised with me by the chairman of Gillingham Football Club, Division 1 Football Club, and also covering Division 2. A lot of those matches for those clubs are postponed. They rely on match day income to support them. Can the Chancellor just say what will be done to work with those smaller football clubs and organisations to ensure that their HMRC payments are dealt with adequately and that they are given soft loans over a certain period of time to ensure that they can get through these challenging, difficult circumstances?
I tell my honourable friend that his football club, like many others, will be eligible for the business rates relief measures and grants that I've announced today. With regard to HMRC, we activated Time to Pay last week. There are now 2,000 specific dedicated HMRC officers ready to take the calls of businesses like Gillingham Football Club to provide exactly what he suggested, a deferral for their tax payments and an agreed schedule to pay them back.
Ann Jones.
Yesterday, the government announced measures regarding the hospitality industry. Can I say to the Chancellor, businesses are laying off people today across the country, and certainly in County Durham, where I've spoken to businesses this afternoon. It is clear the Chancellor has not got a clue how ordinary people live. They have not got access to savings, they have not got access to trust funds or independent wealth. They rely on what comes in each week. So can I urge him very strongly either to ensure that benefits are paid from day one, or that we actually have to bring some system in which allows government to subsidise wages directly for some small businesses.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's because we care deeply about the financial security of all people that we want to work hardest to protect their jobs. That's the way to help working people in this country. We strengthen the welfare system, and the measures we've taken today will increase the likelihood that we can preserve those jobs, and we know that there's more to do.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome the package of measures that the Chancellor announced this evening, but when does he expect to be able to give some more detail on support for the aviation industry? Virgin Atlantic, EasyJet, British Airways, Gatwick Airport itself, in my constituency, are deeply suffering.
I know my honourable friend will know these businesses well. He should rest assured we are already in contact with them, both at the Treasury and the Department of Transportation. And as I said, we will work with them as quickly as possible to put in place what measures are necessary.
Brendan O'Hara.
This afternoon, Lochfine, Langestine and Tarbuck, which employs 20 people in the village, told me they didn't have a single UK or export sale today. Soon their boats will be tied up, processors will be laid off and the business could close. But the Far East markets are beginning to reopen and there is a glimmer of hope. So will the UK Government work with the Scottish Government to help arrange cargo flights to get into these reopening markets as soon as possible?
I'm happy to ask my friend the Trade Secretary and Environment Secretary to have a look at that.
Alan Kearns, come on.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I pay tribute to my right honourable friend for the scale of the package that he's announced, and also recognise the significance of the Barney consequences that will come. But does he also agree that simplicity and commonality are key features? It was only late yesterday that the Welsh Government matched the business rate package, which left many business people in my constituency anxious before they could make available the support that's available. Does he recognise that commonality will be an important theme?
My right honourable friend makes an excellent point. A simple common message across our union would make an enormous difference to people everywhere.
Tim Deutsche.
I'm disappointed to hear the tone from the right gentleman opposite. And I don't doubt what the Chancellor and the Chief Secretary have said about the devolved administrations and what they're trying to do to give them information. But I must tell him it isn't clear and it isn't working. And he knows that getting cash to the front line, to businesses and individuals, is absolutely mission critical and time critical at this moment. So will he work with the administration so that they can make future announcements together, so that businesses are not confused, that people are not scared, we don't have further chaos? That hasn't happened today, and the Welsh Finance Minister made very clear she would do that, but they didn't have the information. So can we sort that out, please, as a matter of urgency?
I thank the honourable member for his comments, and the Chief Secretary, as I said, will talk with all his counterparts in the DAs and to ensure as coordinated approach as we can achieve.
Robert Courts.
Speaker, I warmly welcome the package that's been announced today, but my constituency is home to one of the largest concentrations of self-employed people in the country, and would the Chancellor please commit to looking at what further help might be given for them, and would he also please look at A2 properties which don't currently receive business rates relief and see whether some of those, like estate agents on the high streets, can be helped?
Well, I know my honourable friend is a champion of the self-employed. Some of the measures announced last week at budget will benefit them, and indeed some of the loan and other grant measures today will also, depending on their circumstances. But he's right, and we will, of course, keep an eye on that as we develop these packages.
Matt Fadden.
The difference with this crisis is the profound effect it's having on human behaviour. And the Chancellor has acknowledged that the big missing piece from the package announced tonight is direct financial support for workers who are laid off as a result of the advice that the government has given the country. So will he commit now, in principle, if he can't give the number, to bringing forward a package of support of wages, a significant proportion of the wages of those who've been laid off as a result of this crisis?
Mr. Speaker, I've already committed that that is an urgent piece of work that we're undertaking, but we already have improved the financial security available to people who do find themselves either ill or off work as a result of the £1 billion invested last week in these measures.
Natalie Elphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At a time of national emergency and a time of national need, Dover once again stands ready to do its duty. The Port of Dover, the hauliers, the ferry companies will be moving the goods, the medicines and the resources that are needed to keep our country safe and fed. Will my right honourable friend assure the House that the port, transport, ferry companies, border force and all the hard-working local workers in my constituency will be given the necessary financial and practical assistance so they can do their duty for our country.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the vital importance of our ports, in particular Dover. They are conduits for trade and everything else our country needs at this critical time, and of course we stand ready to listen and hear what they need.
Chancellor. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night, a constituent in the hospitality trade contacted me to express concern at the Prime Minister's measures and ask what could be done about them. Today, she emailed me to say that she'd been made redundant and ask how she could pay her rent. The Chancellor seems to not to grasp the scale of the fear, the uncertainty, the desperation in the country now. So will he guarantee to me now that every renter will have the means to pay their rent and every small business the means to pay their staff?
Mr. Speaker, it's because of what was announced yesterday and the particular impact on the hospitality sector that today we announce a series of steps of considerable support for that sector. And she's absolutely, as I've already said, when it comes to renting, the Housing Secretary will shortly be announcing measures to protect renters in these circumstances, and we have strengthened the safety net, the security for people to fall back on.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In amplifying the point made by my right honourable friend from Chingford Green, will the Chancellor specifically say whether the charitable sector will be eligible for both the rate holiday and the grant funding? It's critical, Mr. Speaker, that we help those whose aim, purpose and mission is to help others.
Most charities already are eligible for 80% charitable rate relief, but they will benefit from the new enhanced retail rate relief at 100%.
Catherine McKinnell.
The Chancellor has talked about courage. I'll tell him what takes courage. Fighting this pandemic on the front line without adequate protective clothing. So will he commit right now to do whatever it takes to ensure every single frontline healthcare worker has the protective clothing they need if they are working exposed to this virus?
My right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, is working around the clock to support our healthcare workers to have everything they need to do the vital job that they're doing for us. They will get whatever support that they require.
Mark Harper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the scale of what the Chancellor has announced. I think it is up to the mark, and some of his specific measures will be welcomed by constituents who have contacted me. But can I press him a little on the employment support package? I recognise the importance of coming up with a package that is deliverable, but I fear if he isn't able to say anything more urgently, he needs to give businesses the confidence to keep those employees employed, because some of them are going to be facing massive reductions in cash flow immediately. And can he look at what he can say quicker than next week to give them the confidence that they'll be supported in due course?
I very much appreciate the strains that business cash flows are under, which is why today we've already taken steps with the announcement of new cash grants of £10,000, £25,000 and an extension of the business rate holiday to thousands more businesses.
Ben Cooper.
The health action that is being put into place is essential to save lives. But does the Chancellor accept that that also means that some of the jobs that are going this week and the redundancies are being made are not going to come back in a hurry? Because you simply cannot do a lot of hospitality or leisure or tourism jobs under a social distance. So will he accept that there is a gap between the employment support package he is rightly working on, I hope, as fast as possible, and also the welfare support that is simply not adequate for the huge numbers of people that are going to be urgently losing their jobs and are going to be terrified of losing their homes as well?
Mr. Speaker, we have strengthened the security and the safety net for those that are in that situation, but she's right, we are urgently working on measures to do more.
Aaron Bell.
Speaker, I asked for more firepower at 4:30 this afternoon. It's fair to say the Chancellor has delivered. But a number of businesses whose entire model has been undermined, like village pubs and restaurants, are facing a very uncertain year. On that note, could I ask him what he proposes they should do, and could I also ask him to welcome the announcement by my right honourable friend, the Community Secretary, that such businesses can now operate as takeaways, which will help to solve some of the problems of self-isolation as well?
Chancellor.
My honourable friend makes an excellent point about the community secretary and what he's done. I think it will make an enormous difference, as will the cash support that we've provided today to pubs and restaurants in his constituency and elsewhere across the country.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
This is a welcome step in the right direction. There's much to welcome from the Chancellor's announcement, but the family reliant on a 0 hours contract hospitality worker's salary, or the self-employed tradesman whose cash flow has dried up, they want to know how this money will reach their bank accounts. What prevents him, therefore, from bringing forward a coronavirus universal basic income in his package of new measures? This in itself would give confidence to thousands of Welsh workers and beyond.
Yes. Madam Deputy, Mr. Speaker, we've already taken steps to strengthen the safety net. For the workers that she's particularly mentioned, they will be eligible for those enhanced packages. And beyond that, we're of course looking to do more, as she knows, in the employment support field.
Tim Morton.
Mr. Speaker, these measures are indeed bold and will bring practical support. And I particularly look forward to further information about renters and for the childcare and nursery sector, which was genuinely omitted from the budget last week and is in a very fragile state. On the hospitality industry, which you rightly singled out, our third largest industry, they are laying off people now. Their customers are absolutely collapsing now. I am told they're approaching banks and being told we may be able to get something for you in April. Can he instil a sense of urgency in the banks and make sure the grants that are coming from central government are immediate and they don't have to wait for them, and it could make the difference between them being there in a few weeks' time or not?
I can tell him the grant schemes are being delivered in the coming weeks. Businesses will receive a letter from local authorities. My honourable friend, the Community Secretary, is making that work at pace. With regard to the loan schemes, that will not take until April. They will be ready to access for businesses from the start of next week.
Beth Winter.
Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor says we have to do whatever it takes, and I completely agree with him. But this must apply to everybody in the UK. I cannot believe that every step of the way we, the fifth richest nation in the world, are having to battle for the poorest and those struggling most in our communities, including my constituency of Cynon Valley, like the homeless people, those who do not qualify for statutory sick pay, private renters and families on low income. When can we stop debating and start the action that's so desperately needed?
Well, I refer to the Honourable Lady to the measures in the budget last week, in particular around homelessness and rough sleeping, where we announced £640 million to build 6,000 more units, and also to provide support for substance abuse support services once people are off the streets to help them tackle the long-term addictions they have. That will money that will make an enormous difference and build on the good work of the Community Secretary already.
Greg Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was not possible for ordinary businesses and working people to anticipate the scale of this, the most severe public health crisis for 100 years. So does the Chancellor accept that for many businesses, the nation will have to act not so much as a lender of last resort, but as a collective insurer of last resort, meeting their unmet operating costs if they are to keep people employed and inoculate against economic contagion?
I think my honourable friend is right to highlight the need to provide support for businesses with their fixed costs rather than their variable ones. That's what we need to help bridge through. The cash grants today related to rateable value are referenced directly to rent payments, I think, but he's right, the other fixed costs will be people, and that's why we're working up measures in that area.
Nick Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The measures in the Red Book are nowhere near enough. So, for families in need, can SSP be available from day one for all workers when they're sick, and can it be put at the level of the national minimum wage?
As a result of the actions of my honourable friend, the Work and Pension Secretary, SSP is available for those that are eligible for it from day one. Regulations are being laid to that effect, and also ESA will also be available from day one rather than day 8.
Damien Green.
Measures announced by my right honourable friend are extremely welcome, and he should be congratulated for them. For many people, freelancers, those working in the gig economy, the most vital thing over the next few weeks will be some kind of guarantee of continuing income, so they can know they can continue to pay their bills. Will these measures and the ones that he says are to come over the next few days guarantee them this vital help?
Many of the workers in the gig economy will actually benefit from statutory sick pay depending on their exact contractual relationship with their employers, but the measures we undertook last week at budget will provide direct support to those people.
West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What contingency will be put aside by the Treasury to assist in recruiting more social care workers who are desperately needed to look after people in their homes as they fall ill?
With regard to public services, as I reiterated last week, we will provide whatever is required to public services. My honourable friend, the Health Secretary, is working with the Local Government Secretary to understand exactly what is required in social care.
Good Merriman.
Speaking, can I welcome the Chancellor's package that's been laid out and also all the work that he's been doing. He said he'll look at other things over the coming days. Can I please ask him to look at preschools and nurseries? They pay business rates, so are not going to receive the £10,000, but they are not within the category of hospitality, retail and leisure. And mine have been in to see me today and they are very worried, and that would be awful for the very people that we rely on, their parents. So could I please ask him to consider that ask?
I thank my honourable friend for his comments, and I'm happy to look at what he's saying.
Thank you, Leah.
Mr. Speaker, many of my constituents are also freelancers. One wrote to me, unable to pay his rent or his bills in the next couple of weeks. That's how urgent it is. Can the Chancellor give us any comfort tonight so that people who are very, very worried, they've been laid off today, they have no ability to pay the bills, their freelance work has dried up, and we're told we have to wait for an answer from his honourable friend. The government's known this was coming. Where's the planning? What answer has he got now?
For those people, the measures that we took last week will already start to help from day one. Well, the Work and Pension Secretary has already put in place support to make sure that access to security that they need is both faster and more generous than it was.
Caroline Noakes.
The events industry is not only highly seasonal, it's full of people who are working on a self-employed basis. What reassurance can my right honourable friend give, given that this season has been pretty much wiped out, that he's looking to their needs?
I'm happy to look at specifically at the issue she raised, but I would also say the measures we took last week will provide immediate support to many of her constituents in that situation.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was contacted today by a constituent who is self-isolating and has underlying health conditions. She was trying to get a food delivery which she vitally needs. Tesco could only do it within 10 days, the other suppliers were 3 weeks. So it's clearly a massive issue here, probably accommodation of stock, and having the right logistics and, to manage the deliveries. So the Chancellor do whatever it takes to work with the supermarkets and work with logistic companies. There's actually opportunities here to get other people into short-term employment if this is done right, but it needs to be done right and done quickly so that people can get the supplies they need.
I think the honourable member is right. The security of our food supply and deliveries are critical. I know my honourable friend, the Environment Secretary, is already having those conversations and has already taken steps with regards to curfews of deliveries to ensure that deliveries can continue and those security of those supply chains.
Steve Bryan.
Today is a very good part one, and I think the Chancellor will be the first to admit that it is part one. He's obviously got a lot of other work streams that are ongoing. So many of my constituents, I don't know what he's done with the mortgage lenders, but they'll be incredibly pleased, as will people across the country, about the 3-month holiday. But probably the second biggest outgoing for thousands of my constituents is their season ticket for their train travel. Right now they're paying for a service that they're not getting. Some would argue they've been getting barely that for a long time. But they're currently paying for a service they're not getting at all, or they're not able to use at all. Will he use whatever influence he did with the mortgage lenders to lean on the train companies to show some humanity to their customers right now, because frankly they're not in their best books already?
Well, my honourable friend, I know, is always a champion of his commuting constituents. I'm happy to have that conversation with the Transport Secretary and see what we can encourage companies to do, whether it's mortgage companies or others, to help people through this difficult time.
Mr. Speaker, for somebody who's self-employed, self-isolation will often mean giving up their income. Advice is to claim benefit, but with universal credit, all you get, as my right honourable friend pointed out, in the first 5 weeks is a loan, and people are not going to give up their income for that. For those who lose their income because of this crisis, will he replace those advances with non-repayable grants?
I would just say, depending on the particular circumstances of the person who's self-employed, it may well be that they qualify for ESA, which also is available from day one now rather than day 8.
Mundell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was very pleased this evening when Nicola Sturgeon confirmed to me promptly that every penny of the likely £1.9 billion which the Scottish Government will receive as a result of today's announcement will go directly to businesses and individuals. And it's very important that we have that common approach across the United Kingdom from governments, but it's also important that we have a common approach from banks. And the Chancellor has referenced the banks in relation to his loan and grant schemes, but many businesses have existing loan arrangements with the banks. What confirmation does he have from the banks that they will not seek to change those arrangements or to take advantage of the situation where people may be able to get government money to repay those loans?
Chancellor.
Tell my right honourable friend that we've had extensive discussions with the banks just this week and they have outlined their forbearance measures, and I very much expect them to honour those commitments, but he's absolutely right with his point before. We will get through this as one united kingdom.
Sultan.
Today the government has announced a mortgage holiday for homeowners. That is welcome, but they have made the political choice to not give a rent suspension to millions of tenants. Mr. Speaker, average rent is £220 a week, statutory sick pay is £94.25 a week. So before people are forced onto the street because this virus will stop them from working, I call on the government, like many other members in this House, to follow the example of other countries and suspend rent and ban evictions today. Do it today.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady talked about other countries. If she'll look at the overall scale of the fiscal interventions that we've outlined last week and this week, it is more significant than almost every other country.
Sarah Atherton.
The Welsh Labour Government stands to gain £1.6 billion as a consequence of corona. Would my right honourable friend comment on how the UK Government can encourage the Welsh Labour Government to spend this money timely and appropriately, because business and people need help now?
Well, as I said before, we will get through this as one united kingdom. We've provided Barnett consequentials early and in advance to devolved authorities, and I very much hope that we can take a joint approach to supporting businesses, public services and individuals through this difficult time.
Mr. Speaker, the notes that have been handed out from the Vote Office tonight say a statement to the press, not to the House of Commons. There is no difference, I don't think, between what the Chancellor has said to the House and what was said to the House, the press earlier on, and that shouldn't happen again. But are businesses that are strapped for cash flow likely to take out a loan rather than lay staff off? Isn't it assistance with paying wages that they don't have to later pay back what these businesses need? They don't need more debt from the government, they need help with paying wages.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as we've already outlined, in addition to the extensive loan guarantee scheme, we've also announced significant cash grants to business to provide immediate cash flow relief to them, and with regard to employment support, as I said, that is our next urgent priority.
Andrew Griffith.
Mr. Speaker, difficult times require bold measures, and can I commend my right honourable friend for twice in the space of a week coming to this House and showing his ability to and demonstrating that he's going to do whatever it takes. Can I join my comments on employment support, but also ask him to extend hospitality and leisure benefits to the equally hard-pressed exhibition sector?
I thank my honourable friend for his support. With regard to the exhibition sector, those that have physical properties and business rates will be eligible for the scheme that we announced today and the cash grants, but I'm happy to have further conversations with him as well.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The RSA recently pointed out that 32% of workers in this country live in terms of savings on less than £500 a month, and 41% have only less than £1,000 in the bank. So that means there could be as many as 20 million people living just one paycheck to the next. In terms of what I've heard tonight, Mr. Chancellor, the renters, the freelancers, the gig economy workers, the zero-hours contract workers will not be feeling reassured. Will you be able to look them in the eye and tell them honestly that you have truly done enough, or are they going to be collateral damage on the scrap heap like so many of your already failing strategy over herd immunity?
Mr. Speaker, we already took extensive measures last week to strengthen our safety net for vulnerable people that he mentioned, but I firmly believe that the best way to help all people through this is to protect their jobs, and that is why the actions we have taken today to support business cash flows provide our best means of doing exactly that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I warmly welcome the bold and decisive steps that the Chancellor has taken today that will be welcomed by many businesses in mid-Cornwall and particularly the hospitality sector. But can I just raise with him, I know what many honourable members have already raised, and that is of the self-employed and small businesses who don't own premises and therefore won't benefit from the measures he's taking on business rates and grants. Many of them have overheads. They're not rent, but they're keeping vehicles on the road, like taxi drivers, window cleaners, electricians, plumbers, etc. Will he please urgently look at what he can do to get cash to these people so they can keep their businesses going?
I'm happy to look at all the measures my honourable friend suggested. The steps we took last week will provide immediate support to those, and our further measures that are coming will also provide a degree of relief for those that have property and small businesses, and of course they will be able to access the loans that we've talked about. But he's right to highlight the importance of those that are self-employed. They deserve our support, and indeed last week and this week they are getting it.
Chris Elmore. Following the question of the honourable gentleman just before me, can I press the Chancellor a little further on sole traders? Because there are HMRC issues around taxation that he can introduce very quickly that would support sole traders, because very many in my constituency are very worried that they will not benefit from any of the Chancellor's proposals being laid out last week or today. And it really would be good if the Chancellor would look at this as a specific area with other Treasury officials, with devolved governments and with anybody else who can support these sole traders.
Well, I'm very, very happy to hear those suggestions from the honourable gentleman. He will, of course, have noted the comments made by the Chief Secretary earlier in relation to IR35, and, of course, HMRC has activated its time to pay service, but if he sends me the details, I'll happily have a look at it.
Richard Drax.
Mr. Speaker, can I recommend my honourable friend for this raft of packages, although there's still clearly from both sides of the House a lot more to do. I shudder at the administrative task ahead of him to ensure that all this money gets to the right people at the right time. Was it not a lesson for us all that these small bank branches, which have closed over the years, should be brought back, particularly in rural communities that simply don't have access to them?
My honourable friend is right to highlight the importance of rural communities. My honourable friend has done a sterling job preserving access to cash for those communities, and indeed we have said that we will legislate to do more, but in the short term he's right that we will keep that, of course, under review.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask him again if he will work with the Home Office to revisit their rules on no recourse to public funds? Because if they don't revisit those rules, some of the most vulnerable people in this country, thousands and thousands of them, will not have access even to the most basic support to see them through this crisis.
I said my honourable friend, the Chief Secretary, is talking to all departments about the resources that they require to help get through these challenging few months.
Rick.
Mr. Speaker, can I warmly welcome this package of support for small businesses, which has been warmly welcomed by a number of business people that have contacted me already today. The business interruption loan scheme is a key part of this, but there are some lenders cannot access this scheme because they're not registered with the British Business Bank, and it would take months for them to do so. Would he act now to make sure all lenders can access this scheme?
I thank my honourable friend for his comments. He's absolutely right. We want this to be available through as many branches and outlets as possible. We're urgently working with the PRA to see if we can onboard new providers at pace. He'll understand there are regulatory requirements, but we are seeing what we are doing to speed those up.
The agreement.
I welcome the increase in the small business grant to £10,000, and I understand that these grants will be distributed by local authorities. Can he tell us what assessment he's made of the capacity of local council to deliver this help, and when will businesses actually receive the money?
As a former local government minister, I have amazing faith in the capacity of our local authorities to deliver for us in this regard. They're being provided with extra resources to help deal with the administration of this. My honourable friend, the Community Secretary, is already working at pace to ensure the rebilling and process of these grants happens in a matter of days and weeks.
Stephen Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I warmly commend my right honourable friend for this package? Can I say to him that the support for the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors is really welcome, but he could make it even more effective if he extended the same package to those who are in the supply chain for those industries and those businesses that disproportionately supply customers for those industries, such as English language schools.
My honourable friend makes an interesting point, and that's why all Secretaries of State have been tasked by me to engage with their affected industries to see if there are further specific measures of support that are worth us exploring.
That's sharp.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Chancellor's measures for small businesses, especially in my constituency. Lots of people have been in touch with us. But these are only effective if they are timely. So when will the measures be available to small businesses, the grants, in cash, in real terms? And can he also consider the idea of when landlords actually get rent breaks, that they mortgage breaks, can they pass them on to their renters and ensure, how will we ensure that actually happens?
Mr. Speaker, in terms of the processing of the cash grants, as I said, my honourable friend, the Community Secretary, is working on this at pace. It will require local authorities to write to those recipients of small business rate relief to collect their bank details, which they don't hold centrally, so that they can then provide the cash payment. But I can assure her that work is happening at pace.
Mark Paulson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Businesses in the hospitality sector will appreciate the relief he's given on business rate and the cash grants, but can I raise the question of suppliers to the sector, many of whom have seen their sales fall off a cliff, in particular those with live products short-dated, such as Wood Farm Microbrewery in my constituency, who produce an excellent product, but they have got £20,000 worth of short-dated stock with 4 weeks life left on it, and stand to bear a pretty substantial loss as a consequence. Is there something that can be done to support businesses such as these?
I thank my honourable friend for raising that particular case, and I'm happy to have a look at it.
Emma Little-Butt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's public health advice to avoid pubs, restaurants and theatres wasn't coupled with immediate economic protections, causing panic and upset for the small businesses, the self-employed and those on zero-hours contracts who form the backbone of coastal constituencies like mine. Measures announced today do not address their concerns. They struggle with high rent and high bills. My friends have lost their jobs today. Today, the grafters should have been a priority. When will they be?
Mr. Speaker, it was a package of measures today which does specifically provide cash support to those in that sector to help with things like rent. But I make no apology for us being led by the public health response. This is first and foremost a public health emergency, and we will be led by responding to that. Of course, the economy is foremost in our minds, and I will always respond quickly and rapidly to any changes in the public health advice.
John Burrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I commend the Chancellor for this package of measures as far as they go. It's a moving narrative, we understand, and I particularly urge him to focus on the importance of cash flow when it comes to smaller businesses and the self-employed. But can I raise with him a group of people who so far have not been mentioned, and that is the elderly and the vulnerable who live alone. There is a real risk in a situation like this that they get inadvertently overlooked. We need to reach out to them. Would the Chancellor consider providing appropriate support for local authorities to do just that? Identify them, locate them, make contact, because no one should be left behind.
I can tell my honourable friend he's absolutely right, and the Community's Local Government Secretary has already been engaging on this particular issue, working together with the Health Secretary with regard to social care to make sure that in our local communities we can identify and protect those elderly and most vulnerable and make sure that they get the support that they need.
Chamberlain.
My constituent in the How of Fife is self-employed and contacted me today, worried about her future employment and how she will pay her mortgage and support her family. And although I welcome the Chancellor's moves in relation to mortgages, the fact is that mortgage products often have payment holidays as part of them. So given that these are the first steps, can I firstly ask the Chancellor, is it going to be for people who are directly impacted by coronavirus, or is it potentially for people who are self-isolating at the risk of getting infection? And second of all, is he considering other measures to support support my constituent, such as statutory sick pay for the self-employed, or indeed council tax relief.
I would say to the Honourable Lady, I think the measures today on mortgage forbearance are significant and welcome, and banks will show flexibility in providing that. And with regard to council tax support, we did provide £500 million hardship funding to local authorities, specifically to use and deploy through their local council tax support systems that already exist to provide extra support to people for their council tax bills.
Tim Vickers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Chancellor's package, but he will recognise that many of our constituents will remain anxious, and we look forward to further measures. He rightly referenced the aviation sector, which could lose many thousands of jobs, but at a more local level, bus and coach operators are going to suffer as a result of people staying at home, and they provide a vital service to get NHS workers, for example, to and from work. Could he have a word with his colleague in the Transport Department and ensure that bus operators are looked after?
I think my honourable friend makes a good point, and I will certainly take that up with the Transport Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Denmark can step in and offer 70% subsidies as a transitional arrangement, then why can't the Chancellor step up? Step up.
Mr. Speaker, we've already mentioned looking at the Denmark scheme and indeed the German scheme. As I said, the point is what we are able to deliver at pace. Other countries have had schemes in place beforehand, which makes it easier for them to do things, and we need to work with what we've got. But the principle of providing support is one that I have fully acknowledged, and which is why we're working on it at pace. But again, I will make this point, looking at individual measures, it is worth looking at the fiscal interventions in the round between this week and last week, and in the context of any global response, they are extremely significant.
Bob Schumer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Chancellor's statement. Two questions. For charities and social enterprises like Help the Aged on the Isle of Wight or the West Wight Sports Centre, they face significant income cuts, and I fear that rate relief will not be enough. So is there more that can be done to support social enterprises? Secondly, my Chamber of Commerce is concerned about the ability of small businesses, especially tourism businesses, to access the grants, and they fear that, quote, businesses will be closing and en masse before money becomes available. So can we act as swiftly as possible, as quickly as possible, as generously as possible?
Mr. Speaker, as I've made the point, my honourable friend, the Community Secretary, would have been in touch already with his local council through MHCLG. They will be the ones processing these grants. There's no reason why that can't happen as swiftly as the council are able to act.
David Jones.
Mr. Speaker. In the past few weeks, businesses in my constituency of Pontypridd and across Rhondda and Taff have been devastated by unprecedented flooding, and they're still trying to recover. Many are faced with the bureaucracy of insurers, and they are trying to rebuild their livelihoods. Now they're faced with the prospect of closing for good because of the loss of business because of coronavirus. So I ask the Chancellor, what conversations is he having with Welsh Government to secure financial relief for all these businesses in the UK?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady asked about flooding, which is why in last week's budget we outlined a variety of packages to help with the communities affected by flooding. First and foremost, £120 million to rebuild flood defences that have just been destroyed, £200 million of new resilience funding for communities that are repeatedly flooded, and £5.2 billion, which represents a doubling of the amount that we spend every year to build new flood defences. It will protect 300,000 people, and that comes all on top of the work that my honourable friend, the Community Secretary, has done activating the Bellwyn scheme and providing immediate relief to communities that have impacted by local flooding.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Chancellor's pledge to do whatever it takes to support businesses, families and individuals. But when will we get the details of support for renters, support for the self-employed, support for freelancers? And when will businesses who are losing customers day by day now get those cash grants in their bank accounts so they can pay their staff, keep them employed and also pay their rents?
Say to my honourable friend, the measures to help those who are self-employed in the gig economy are already taken effect as a result of the measures taken last week, and my honourable friend, the Community Secretary, is working at pace to deliver these cash grants to businesses in the coming days and weeks.
You're right.
Sole traders in my constituency work as driving instructors and personal trainers. We are watching their bookings literally evaporate in front of their eyes. So what support is the Chancellor providing to people who are sole traders?
Again, the measures that we took last week to strengthen our security net will be of benefit to those who are self-employed and sole traders. Those obviously that have properties that qualify for business rate relief will benefit from that, and indeed the cash grants will also flow to those people.
Select Committee, we asked the Chancellor to throw the kitchen sink at the economy, and you have certainly done that, so thank you. But small businesses in my constituency of Kensington do have an issue, because most of the business rate relief is only being funnelled if the rateable value is under £51,000, but they are suffering in the same way as other businesses. Will you look into this?
Well, I'm pleased to tell my honourable friend that as a result of the measures I've taken today, any business in the retail, hospitality and leisure sector, regardless of their rateable value, will now qualify for 100% business rate relief for these next 12 months.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like colleagues, I spent today talking to businesses in my community. They wanted to know that when they follow health advice to the letter, and if they keep their staff all on payroll as they desperately want to, that their business will be safe. Chancellor, as a result of your package announced tonight, can I give them that categoric assurance first thing in the morning?
I very much hope that the businesses that are looking at the range of measures outlined today will see that there is significant financial support for them, whether it's business rate holidays, direct cash grants, or indeed access to incredibly low-cost and accessible financing. The combination of all these measures, on top of the compensation that we will pay to small and medium-sized businesses for statutory sick pay, are a significant direct fiscal support for businesses up and down our country to protect people's jobs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Life on the Isle of Scilly and the economy is particularly fragile. I'll give you a very quick example. A passenger boat operator who needs to provide a service for the whole of the islands but relies on tourism is telling me that he has 5 weeks left in business to run. What can the Chancellor do to help these businesses and help the community on the Isle of Scilly?
Well, my honourable friend is right to highlight the particular issues that his remote communities face. I do believe the measures announced today, whether on business rates or direct cash grants, will make an enormous difference to local businesses in his constituency.
Robinson. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful for the Chancellor and the effort that he's putting into these measures. One question that has been raised is about business interruption payments and the facility made available. Can the Chancellor outline what criteria will apply to that, whether there will be complete access should be required, or whether businesses are going to have to fulfil criteria which will be assessed, and if so, on what basis? On the basis of books this week, last week, or before any interruption at all?
I think my honourable friend makes an excellent point. Our ambition is for the criteria to be as flexible and as generous as possible. The basic point will be to ensure that a business was sensible and well traded before coming into this crisis that it's now facing, and as long as that is the case, then the loans should be able to be provided through the banks on the ground, with our guarantee standing behind that.
Should payment quarterly and in advance be tolerated for commercial lets?
Well, my honourable friend, as always, makes a pithy point. He's right to highlight the importance of prompt payment, especially during this time, which is why the government is taking every step it can to be as prompt in its payments, and is urging all other businesses that can do to do exactly the same.
Diana Johnson, Dame Diana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In terms of the exceptional circumstances we're in, why exactly can statutory sick pay not be paid at the real living wage rate?
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, we have an extensive security and support network which extends beyond statutory sick pay also to an NHS that is free at the point of use. Our welfare and security support system works well, and we have buttressed it with an extra £1 billion of investment last week.
Geoffrey Clifton-Blunt.
Very grateful, Mr. Speaker. Whilst I congratulate my right honourable friend on the package he's worked very hard on, sadly I received a phone call today from one of my employers whose contract had been cancelled forthwith. He's had to lay off 1,000 people. There will be a lot of very anxious people tonight. Whilst they are entitled probably to employment support allowance and universal benefit, they will suffer a very considerable drop in their wages. I do welcome and urge the Chancellor to come up with an employment support package as soon as possible.
I thank my honourable friend for his support, and I'm sympathy with his constituents in that situation. That's why we strengthened our security and safety net last week. But the best thing we can do is to help employers get through this and ensure that those jobs are ready for people to go back to as soon as practically possible.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reality is that universal credit and statutory sick pay weren't generous enough in the best of times, and they're certainly not enough to live on in these worst of times. So when the Chancellor comes forward again, can he announce immediate plans to provide for income protection for people who suffer loss of earnings, and for those freelancers and contractors facing tax bills in July for work that will never materialise in these circumstances? Can he give those people a tax holiday?
Mr. Speaker, with regard to the safety net, we've taken steps to strengthen that. With regard to deferring of tax payments, that is something actively that is able to happen through Time to Pay. I would urge people to contact Time to Pay. The details are available online. HMRC have 2,000 people standing by to talk to individuals, and if tax deferrals are needed, they stand ready to negotiate and agree those.
Speaker, on behalf of my constituents of Arnis Moor, may I welcome the significant package of financial measures that the Government has made available today. Businesses like Seaway, Gwynedd Shipping and the restaurant Catch-22 have contacted me today, desperate for this Government to take action. Will the Chancellor join me in urging the Welsh Government to make this additional funding available as quickly as possible to small businesses across Wales in order that they can survive?
I think my honourable friend is right to highlight the importance of speed in Wales and everywhere else. That's why we've taken the steps to make Barnett consequentials available in advance as quickly as we can, so all devolved authorities can plan and execute their plans expeditiously.
Toby Perkins. Mr. Speaker, businesses are facing collapsing revenues, and the biggest part of the Chancellor's response is to invite them to take on substantially more debt. That isn't going to save people's jobs, and for the Chancellor to compare that £330 billion, which is a guarantee that he's making that he may never have to spend, with the package that President Macron put together in France is absolutely absurd.
Far from being absurd, Mr. Speaker, President Macron yesterday announced exactly €300 billion in loan guarantee schemes.
Robert Largon.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I represent the Peak District, where hotels, restaurants, pubs and the tourism industry in general are absolutely central to the local economy. So I welcome the economic measures announced, but people and businesses are struggling right now. So can I urge the Chancellor to make certain that loans and grants are paid and put into people's bank accounts as soon as possible?
My honourable friend is exactly right, and that's why the steps we're taking are designed to work at pace. As loan schemes will be available from early next week, and my honourable friend, the Community Secretary, is ensuring that the grant payments are processed as quickly as possible through local authorities in the coming days and weeks.
Benno Paldasari.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been contacted by my constituent Andy from Erith and Thamesmead. Businesses like Andy collapsed this week. The scrapping of business rates doesn't help small businesses like Andy.
That's right.
Loans like £300 billion doesn't help small businesses like Andy. Will the Chancellor clearly set out how he will help small businesses? Will he personally promise me that he will help my constituent, Andy, to do whatever it takes to make sure that he is not properly supported?
Mr. Speaker, we have outlined a package of measures to support specifically small businesses. Indeed, 700,000 of our smallest businesses will now be receiving a £10,000 grant. I can maybe suggest to her constituent Andy to contact his local authority for further support, either on business rates or indeed for local council tax support, where we are injecting an extra £500 million into the system.
Mr. Speaker, I declare my interest as a member of Kettering Borough Council. Can I commend the Chancellor for coming up with a £350 billion business support package in absolutely record time, which will be welcomed by many small businesses in Kettering. Billing authorities like Kettering Borough Council are already at the busiest time of year sending out council tax bills. Can the Chancellor explain what role they'll play in getting this business support to local businesses and what extra support they will get to enable that to happen?
My honourable friend makes an absolutely excellent point. He's right to highlight the capacity of local authorities to execute this plan. My honourable friend, the Community Secretary, is working closely with them, and they will be provided with extra resource funding to deal with the extra administration that they are now going to have to undertake on our behalf. But I know and have confidence that they will do that job extremely well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Both sides of the House are
demonstrating that there are gaps in terms of the provision that's been announced and also the urgency of addressing the issue. So could I return to the issue of a universal basic income or a series of flat payments to people? And wouldn't that be a much more efficient and effective way for helping people in the immediate term, with the proviso that money can be, of course, be clawed back through the tax system in due course?
Mr. Speaker, I believe our approach represents a sensible, coherent, coordinated and comprehensive way to tackle this problem. We have a range of targeted measures, each of which I believe will make a significant difference to those on the ground. But as I said, we stand ready to do more and are indeed actively doing extra things.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I warmly welcome the enormity of the package of measures outlined by my right honourable friend. This morning I spoke to Energy Generator Hire Limited in Kimberwick in my constituency, who have lost most of their order book and are uncertain about the future. Can he confirm whether event hire companies are included within the envelope of leisure and hospitality?
I thank my honourable friend for the question. What I would say is those that have business properties will be eligible both for the relief and the grant, which will cover a significant number of event companies which have premises. Obviously, if they don't have premises, they wouldn't qualify for business rates relief, but should be eligible for some of the other measures that I've outlined today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The failure of the Chancellor to mention private renters in his statement was a grave error indeed, because those private renters are many of the same precarious workers in hospitality, in the arts and culture and in other industries who are being laid off today. Will the Chancellor guarantee that no one will lose their home as a consequence of coronavirus?
I say to the Honourable Lady, my right honourable friend, the Housing Secretary, will be urgently and very soon bringing forward measures to protect renters. She's absolutely right to highlight the importance of that, and that's why we will be acting in short order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I commend the Chancellor for coming forward such a comprehensive range of support? If he is to use the benefit system for supporting those ineligible for sick pay, can I urge him to take on board the concerns raised by the member for East Ham, highlighting the fundamental flaw with universal credit? And can I also highlight the vital work that food banks, Citizens Advice, local churches are going to be doing in the coming weeks, and to ensure they get the right support for what they're doing?
I wholeheartedly agree with my honourable friend about the importance of our voluntary sector, particularly at this time, and the vital role that they are going to play. It's right that they get our support, and my right honourable friend, the Community Secretary, is actively engaging with them, and I stand ready to do more as needed.
Nettles. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What measures will the government take to ensure that landlords who benefit from mortgage holidays aren't profiting from the crisis by having their pockets lined by tenants still expected to pay their rent?
As I said, my honourable friend, the Housing Secretary, will be shortly outlining our measures to protect renters. We understand well the point that she makes.
Richard Graham.
This is a huge step to support jobs. Will the Chancellor confirm, because speed is of the essence, when the business interruption loans will be available and how quickly applications will be processed? And will he also confirm that the Community Secretary package will cover renters, self-employed, nurseries, community groups, kindergartens and charities, so that all the jobs in those sectors will be reassured as well?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Speed is of the essence here. The loan programme will be available from early next week. My honourable friend is doing an excellent job working with the banks to make sure those applications will be processed at speed, so that the businesses that need that support will get it quickly.
Bill Esterson.
The amount of money announced for the loan guarantee scheme is a massive sum. But will businesses want to be saddled with debt when they have no income? No means of paying it back? Previous loan schemes have seen poor take-up because the banks have ignored the guarantee part of the scheme. So how is the Chancellor going to make sure that the loan guarantee scheme is delivered by the banks at the scale and speed needed?
I thank the honourable member for the thoughtful question. He's right to question on that particular point. He will be pleased to know that compared to previous loan guarantee schemes, the generosity of the government guarantees are significantly increased in this instance to provide a very strong incentive for the banks to provide that lending. Also, I can say that the banks, we have spoken to them all individually, specifically on this, and have their assurance that they will work at pace to deliver it. They also unilaterally have unlocked, as a result of our entreaties, £21 billion of their own extra lending capacity to provide to the sector. So I'm confident that they will deliver as required.
Danny Kruger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of our businesses depend not on the public or on other businesses, but on the state itself through contracts with different parts of the public sector. And many of these contracts are on a payment by results basis. So they're paid according to outcomes, which might no longer be possible given the situation we're in. So will he work with other parts of government to ensure that the contracts which the state has with particular social enterprises, the charities and social businesses, can be flexed to ensure that these important businesses can stay afloat?
I think my honourable friend makes an excellent point. I'll be sure to raise that with the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster.
Very McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Chancellor just clarify, will community interest companies be treated in the same way as other small companies when it comes to being able to apply for the £10,000 grants?
If the Honourable Lady will forgive me, I don't have a precise answer for her at this moment, but I will look into that as soon as I'm done and make sure I write to her with the answer.
Mike Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A firm in the hospitality sector has written to me to say that they must lay off 200 workers tomorrow and halve the pay of 100 more because bookings are close to zero and they can't cover the wage bill. For how much longer should they hold off for?
Well, I tell my honourable friend that hopefully they will benefit today from the significant measures that have been put in place, both to provide forward business rate relief and indeed immediate cash support through grants to that business, which should provide them with some reassurance that help is on its way and will enable them to support protecting their jobs, with more to come.
Jim Bold-Hotter.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday a constituent of mine was laid off from his employment along with 50 other colleagues and described how he watched his owners trying to hold back the tears as they let go of people who had worked for them for decades. Why won't the Chancellor cut off this problem at the root and provide the same reassurance to British businesses as President Macron is to French businesses that no business will go bankrupt?
Mr. Speaker, as we've already said, or I've already said previously, the French government announced €300 billion of loan guarantees yesterday. We've actually gone a step further with £330 billion of loan guarantees, 15% of our GDP, to provide the same level of support. Beyond that, the fiscal measures that we have taken between today and last week are comparable in scale to that undertaken by any major economy.
Owen Thompson.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. The introduction and increasing grants is a welcome step in the right direction, but a number of food and drink producers in my constituency have seen the outlet for their produce dry up. So what additional supports can be made on offer to companies such as these to help them keep afloat?
Well, I do believe that the measures announced today, whether through the loan or other guarantee schemes, will be of significant support to those businesses. To the employees, the measures we undertook last week will also be of help. As I've said previously, we are looking at more measures in all areas, and I'll update the House as things develop.
Bill Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All of our constituents will require a realistic statutory sick pay if they're required to self-isolate. Could I ask the Chancellor if he will do whatever it takes to ensure that this happens, and also include self-employed people and those on zero-hour contracts in his measures?
Mr. Speaker, as previously discussed, depending on people's particular employment circumstances, it may well be that they are eligible for statutory sick pay, even though they are self-employed or in the gig economy. We have already taken measures to ensure that they are eligible for those benefits and indeed employment support allowance from day 1 rather than day 4 and day 8 respectively, and we've also further strengthened the safety net with an investment of £1 billion.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Hundreds upon hundreds of aviation workers were sent home today in my constituency. Coronavirus has devastated the airline industry because they got less than 3 years' experience. 21 days' pay is all they get with no prospect of a job going forward. Can the Chancellor give us more information about the aviation package that he has announced tonight?
What I can tell the honourable gentleman is that we're in active dialogue with the key companies in the aviation sector, both airlines and airports, to discuss with them what the specific support required might be given the circumstances. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on the individual measures that individual companies might want to engage with us on, but he should rest assured that we are working hard on that particular industry.
Claudia Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the acceleration of the virus, collapse of the aviation industry and no prospect of any deportation or charter flights leaving, and given there is no testing, it seems quite inhumane and unjustified to continue to raid the homes of my constituents in Leicester East, especially when they have underlying health conditions or are self-isolating, to put them indefinitely into detention centres at great expense in poorly sanitised conditions, putting the lives of my constituents in danger and violating their human rights. Detentions, deportations and charter flights are barbaric and costly. The outbreak of COVID-19 further underlies their cruelty and expense. Mr. Speaker, will the Chancellor speak with the Home Secretary, urging her to end them now and immediately?
Well, my honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is doing an excellent job, not just making sure that our borders are secure, but making sure that we enforce our laws as required, but do so in a way that is humane and compatible with all human rights. And I'm sure that she will do exactly that as we go through the challenging next few months.
Speaker, the Chancellor will be aware that in certain business sectors, just the loss of one or two people out of an organisation in specialised roles can bring down a business. Will he support the moves such as in France and Italy, where they're reviving the approach as adopted in the global financial crash of supporting workers with a proportion of their wages? Will he do the same thing?
Mr. Speaker, as I said, we are looking and considering employment support packages and what can be designed and implemented at pace. With regard to other countries, I would again put on record that the fiscal interventions we've undertaken stand in comparable size to those of any other major developed economy.
Kate Green.
There's huge fear and also confusion among my constituents this evening about a whole range of issues, whether measures will apply to start-ups, what will happen to VAT on advanced sales, what about businesses in the hospitality supply chain, what happens if a freelancer can't work because the family member has been sent home and they have to look after them. Could I suggest to the Chancellor that local authorities will not have the capacity to deal with all of these queries while they're doing many other things, including delivering vital services, and it would be very helpful if a dedicated MP hotline could be set up to raise these sorts of questions so that we can go to one place in government to help our constituents.
Happy to look at that suggestion from the Honourable Lady. She asked a specific question about VAT on postponed accounting. It's something that I'm actively looking at in terms of when we are scheduled to bring that in and whether it could be improved.
Aaron Henry.
Mr. Speaker, small businesses in my constituency of Broxtowe will welcome they are eligible for grants of £10,000 up from £3,000 last week. Will my right honourable friend outline how these constituents will receive information on how to access this funding if indeed they do qualify?
If those businesses will already be in receipt of small business rate relief, that will be a known fact to the local authorities, who will shortly be writing to those companies to request their financial details so that they can then process the grant payment to them. So if they haven't heard, in short order, they can get in touch with their local authority.
Deb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 1.6 million people use food banks. That is up 250,000 from the previous year of the data. The increase of people likely to use food banks will increase. The demand will increase. My issue is very much so that the food banks rely on the surplus from supermarkets and they rely on people's food donations. What contingency plan does the Chancellor have in place on how to address this very serious issue?
My honourable friend, the Environment Secretary, is actively engaging with supermarkets to make sure that we do have security of our food supply in all aspects of it, including deliveries, and making sure that everyone who gets the food that they need during this time.
Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor needs to be more than a desiccated calculating machine, and it needs to be taught about people, not just packages, when he answers questions. Can I ask him to look at EDM 302, which I put down, advocating a universal basic income, particularly aimed at freelancers and the self-employed, as a temporary measure during this crisis? And will he pledge to come back to the House rather than just make an announcement through the press, to tell us what he's going to do about these employment measures?
The Honourable Gentleman talks about packages to support business. That is not divorced from people's circumstances. That is absolutely directly helping people's circumstances. The way to help people is to secure their employment now and in the future. That's what these packages are designed to do, which is why they are going to make a real difference to people on the ground.
Short, Gavin Newland.
The Chancellor's already related support for aviation airlines, airports and support services such as baggage handlers have already announced or are strongly considering announcing significant job cuts. So can he reassure them they don't need to do this and that he will be following other governments such as New Zealand, which announced £35 billion worth of direct wage subsidies to keep not just those jobs but all jobs safe?
Mr. Speaker, we've announced our own range of fiscal measures to support businesses to protect jobs, with particular reference to the airline industry. As I've said, my honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, and I are actively engaging with the companies and the airports in that sector to see what support is required.
Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A lot of my constituents work in the events and leisure industry, many as self-employed freelancers, and I spoke to one today who told me that she earns a large proportion of her annual income during the summer event and festival season. Now, she's going to lose that this year, and given that it could be another year before she's able to get back on her feet, can I urge the Chancellor to come back with a package of support for people like her, ideally grant support, a long-term package for individuals in that sector?
Well, those in the leisure and hospitality and retail sectors are, of course, particularly impacted by what we're experiencing, which is why the package of measures announced today build on what was announced last week and go to the heart of that industry and provide direct cash support and business rate relief. The measures we announced last week also provide support to those who are self-employed.
Sandon Peckham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, like many others in this House, are being contacted by constituents who are extremely anxious and worried about the uncertainty and disruption in the months ahead. This includes constituents who are self-isolating, especially those who are expected to self-isolate for extended periods of time, who may face loneliness and other mental health challenges. Is the Chancellor planning to allocate any funding to address this?
I very much appreciate people's anxiety at this difficult time. With regard to those who are self-isolating, we've already made changes to our welfare system to ensure that those people qualify for the support that they deserve. And with regard to public services support, as I've said, the Community Secretary and Health Secretary are actively engaging with those sectors to understand if there is extra support that's required.
Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reality is, for business and workers, this crisis is going to last many months. Has the Chancellor considered a much more interventionist macroeconomic policy? So, for instance, the businesses shutting now, hotels, restaurants, music venues, theatres, has he considered repurposing them as infection rates rapidly rise?
That would be a question from Honourable Friend, the Health Secretary, who is actively engaged in making sure that we can increase the capacity of our health service to cope with the next few months, and is considering a range of measures, but we will do whatever it takes to make sure that we have the capacity we need to help those who fall sick at this time.
Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government effectively discouraged UK citizens from entering sectors of the economy which are traditionally low-paid and precarious in terms of employment. So, in terms of his discussions with trade unions and business over the next few days, is it his intention to enter those discussions with the principle that the wages of those whose jobs are under threat, whose shifts have been cancelled and whose hours have been cut will have their wages protected?
Mr. Speaker, the reason the government told people not to visit these places or to hold back from was based on the advice of scientists and medical experts to ensure that our health as a country is protected. The measures we announced today directly go to help those in those industries to protect those jobs, and as I said, we will work urgently with the unions of businesses to see what further measures can be put in place.
Andy Slaughter.
Speaker, many decisions the government has taken on isolation, on at-risk groups, on testing, limit the ability of NHS staff to go to work. It's easy to say whatever it takes, but how can we be sure that our hospitals in particular have the resources to save every life that can be saved?
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, we take the advice of the Chief Medical Officer in this regard and will continue to do so. We've been absolutely clear that the NHS will get whatever its support financially that it needs from the government in order to help get us through what will be a very challenging time. We're considering all measures to increase the capacity of the NHS to respond to this and indeed provide the support to those on the front line who are going to deal with a very difficult few months.
Sarah Olney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I obviously welcome the Chancellor's commitment to making sure that jobs are saved and that people can stay and work. But I wonder if he would agree with me that by structuring his package around loans rather than grants, he actually loses some control over what the money is spent on, and therefore he can't be certain that the money is going to be spent most effectively in pursuit of this objective.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's not just loans, it's loans and grants and tax relief on business rates and deferral of tax payments through time to pay and reimbursement for statutory sick pay. So across the piece, it's a series of different interventions, all of which I think will be effective at doing one fundamental thing, that's improving the cash flow in the short term of businesses to help them bridge through what will be a temporary dislocation in order so that they can emerge on the other side and we don't lose for the long term that productive capacity and lose those jobs.
Daniel Seidner.
Making announcements is one thing, but to use the Chancellor's words, operationalising at speed is quite another. So could he be more precise about the resources available to the civil service and local councils? Simple example, Canadian nurse who phoned my office today, so frustrated she can't help the NHS because we can't sort out the equivalent qualifications. And it will be the same for many others, particularly Bangladeshi nurses currently working in the care sector.
Well, I'm happy to take on board the suggestion from the Honourable Gentleman. I'll raise it with the Health Secretary. I know he's actively looking at ways where we can bring extra people into the NHS to help respond to this crisis. There's probably a range of options and flexibilities we should consider. I will make sure that I raise that one with him as well.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
Before I put the question, can I suggest to all members this is their opportunity to intervene on Jim Shannon. The question is, this House to now adjourn. Jim